Welcome to your Friday edition of Mark Madness. For our discussion today, I want to take a step back from the Gospel of Mark and talk about how biblical narrative works. It's important to understand that we believe the biblical narrative is historical narrative. That is, it tells actual history. The people, the places, the events, these things truly happened. It's not fictional narrative. It's historical narrative. But it's also important to remember that the Bible's narrative does not function in the same way that a modern history text would function. So, a modern history text wants to tell things in perfect chronological order, and many of them strive to be neutral and objective. They just want to lay out the facts exactly as they happened. The Bible doesn't have that concern. The Bible wants to be historical because it is telling actual historical events and people and situations. But in addition to it being a historical narrative, it is a theological narrative. In other words, it's not entirely unbiased. It has a goal. It has a goal to convince and persuade us of who God is. So, for that reason, the biblical narrative is not to be read like a modern history textbook. It is historically true, but it is written to tell a theological story, just as it is a historical story. For this reason, the biblical authors were more than happy to rearrange the chronology of events. We need to look no further than the four Gospels to see this. If you pay close enough attention to the four Gospels, you'll see that their chronology doesn't always match. One simple example is in the temptations of Jesus. Both the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke have Jesus being baptized and then being driven into the wilderness to be tempted with three specific temptations. The narratives agree on that. But Matthew and Luke describe the temptations in different ways. Specifically, the temptations happen in different order. Why? The three temptations were historically accurate. But neither Matthew nor Luke were primarily concerned about getting the exact order right. Rather, they wanted to communicate the significance of the temptations. So Luke moves the temptation about going to Jerusalem, the heights of Jerusalem, to the last one. Why? Because the Gospel of Luke is always focused on movement towards Jerusalem and what's going to happen there. I'm going to link to a video, one of the Bible Project videos, those creative videos that we've seen a number of times. And this one talks about design in biblical narrative. And as you watch that video, and I'd like you to watch it before you read our passage for today, think about this reality that the biblical narrative is historical narrative, but the biblical narrative is theological narrative. It is trying to convince, it is trying to persuade. It is not trying to be a chronological history textbook or a chronological biography. It feels the freedom to move these actual historical events around. So watch that video and then come back to the Gospel of Mark. The section we're in with the Gospel of Mark today is Mark chapter 8, verses 22 to 26. Simply put, it's the healing of a blind man. But I'd also like you to move to the end of Mark chapter 10, beginning in verse 46 till the end of the chapter. It's another healing of a blind man. And I think there's some narrative design going on here. In Mark 8, 9, and 10, Jesus is really going to reveal what kind of Messiah he is. Specifically, there are going to be three predictions of his crucifixion, his death, and even point towards his resurrection. And as he gives these three descriptions of his upcoming suffering, he's also talking to the disciples about what it means to follow him, the cost of discipleship, as Bonhoeffer would say, and what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. So, chapters 8, 9, and 10 of the Gospel of Mark are very, very significant for understanding Jesus as the sacrificed and crucified Messiah, and for understanding the sacrifice that it takes to be a follower of Jesus Christ. And these things are all framed within an inclusio of the healing of two blind men. That is biblical narrative design at its best. Why? Because Mark is using this blindness to show that Jesus is revealing himself to these disciples who often don't understand, these disciples whom Calvin said had excessive stupidity, these disciples who were blind to the truths of who Jesus was and what Jesus was up to. And these chapters are intended to open their eyes. It's intended to open their eyes so that they could see. These chapters are intended to open our eyes so we can see Jesus for whom he is, and we can see what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ. So Jesus did heal these two blind men, but it's beautifully constructed in such a way to reveal that what Jesus wants to do is to heal our blindness as well. And on Monday, we're going to dive into Mark chapter 8, verse 27, where Jesus is going to start to reveal in new and powerful ways what kind of Messiah he actually is. And throughout the week, we'll see what it means to really be a follower of a crucified Messiah. Have a great weekend. We'll see you then.